Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Well, ever since this one came out, you guys have been asking for it. Epic History has a new video out about Napoleon. This is Napoleon's greatest gamble, the escape from Elba. And as always, I will add this one to our long list of reactions to Epic History's Napoleonic War content. Some of the best stuff out there. Definitely go and check out all of their videos. We want to support our original content creators. I put the link down in the description so you can check it out without my commentary. Make sure you subscribe to Epic History if you are interested in the Napoleonic Wars. I don't know that anybody does it better than they do. So with that in mind, I want to give a shout out, a huge thank you to someone who's been a longtime supporter of this channel and I've had many conversations with, and that's Marstar, who is in Metamora, Illinois, and she is signed up as a producer level patron. Thank you so much for your continued support and your vital participation in this community. Let's dive into this one.
February 1815. A small flotilla slips quietly across the Mediterranean, west of Elba. Its most important passenger, a former emperor, now a fugitive, embarked on the greatest gamble of his astonishing career. Napoleon Bonaparte was the greatest general of his age. His armies had once dominated Europe. But just 11 months earlier, at the end of a 10-year conflict that left millions dead, he'd finally been comprehensively, disastrously defeated.
You know, hindsight is always 20/20, so there was no way to know this at the time, but I often wonder, had he just stayed on Elba? Or for that matter, had he agreed to the negotiated settlement that would have allowed him to stay Emperor of France back before the disastrous defeats of the last couple of years of his reign. But I also wonder if the Allies were ever going to leave him alone. They kept forming these coalitions against him. At least the first several coalitions were ones that kind of put him on the defensive. They weren't really aggressive wars on his part. So I have a lot of sympathy for him, at least in those, and my really creaky chair today. But, you know, by the end, he definitely was just not making good decisions, was being aggressive when he needed to be negotiating, and he could have had a relatively comfortable life had he just remained on Elba. But I think he had tasted too much of the power and influence that he had to just let that go.
The great powers of Europe had hoped to consign Napoleon to history, giving him the tiny island of Elba to rule, and restoring France's Bourbon monarchy.
Yeah, and that's the thing. He was given that island to rule. He wasn't there as a prisoner. I mean, he probably felt like one, but he still was someone who got to live a relatively comfortable, even lavish lifestyle.
But the Emperor of Elba soon became restless. Whispers reach him that France's new king is despised, and many wish for his return.
So for those who don't know, this is Louis XVIII. He is the brother of Louis XVI, who of course had been executed to start all of this.
That his enemies, Britain, Russia, Prussia and Austria, have turned on each other and may have plans to move him to a more remote location.
See, if that's the case, if he believed that was true, then I can understand a little more why he would do what he did.
Napoleon will be no mere spectator to his own fate. His faith in his own destiny is undiminished. Napoleon will act and roll the dice of fortune once more. He will make a daring bid to reclaim his throne and restore France to glory, even if it means plunging all Europe into war once more. But Napoleon's quest may be over before it begins. A day after sailing from Elba, as the sun falls over the Mediterranean, Napoleon's vessel passes within shouting distance of Zephyr, a brig of the French King's Navy. But for an unknown reason, there is no attempt to question or search the suspicious vessel. Perhaps Napoleon's star of destiny still shines after all.
Yeah, and then couple this with what happens later when an army is sent to stop him, and you can see why he would feel that way, that it's like destiny, that, you know, everything's working out in his favor. I have returned in spite of all obstacles and all dangers. Something Napoleon, I mean, and one of the biggest beefs I have with that debacle of a movie about Napoleon, something that was really a huge part of Napoleon's abilities was his charm and his ability to win over and inspire his men.
On the 1st of March 1815, Napoleon lands at Gulf of Juan with 1,000 grenadiers of his Imperial Guard. He's just 15 miles from Nice, where his glorious first Italian campaign began 19 years earlier. Napoleon has no illusions of the danger. He must win support and turn the tables on his enemies before they trap and arrest him, or worse. Therefore, he must travel fast before they can organize. Aix, on the main road, is a royalist stronghold, so Napoleon takes a more mountainous route to the east. He and his entourage travel 190 miles in 6 days.
Wow.
Along narrow, winding tracks. There is snow and ice and sheer mountain cliffs. Napoleon, now 45 years old, has to travel on foot for much of the journey.
This is one of the things we don't think about with all of this. All of this stuff, this incredible legend that is Napoleon Bonaparte, happens when he's in his 30s and 40s. He's a pretty young dude by today's standards.
Sometimes he stumbles and needs assistance. The contrast to the youthful first consul Bonaparte of 1800 crossing these same mountains is stark.
Yeah, you know what? There's a big difference between when you're 30 years old and when you're 45. Take it from one who's pushing 50 now.
Moves north, things start to improve. At Sisteron, Napoleon is welcomed by the mayor. At Gap, he is cheered by crowds. But then, on the 7th of March, outside Grenoble, the road is blocked by French troops sent by the king. The Fifth Line includes many veterans of the Empire, men who have served under Napoleon's command.
Seems like a poor decision on the king's part, unless it's all he had available to him to do this. Why send guys who had served under Napoleon?
There is a standoff. The Emperor's grenadiers implore the Fifth to join them. Then Napoleon himself steps forward, throwing open his grey coat. Soldiers of the Fifth, if there is one among you who wishes to kill his emperor, he can do so. Here I am. A royalist.
This is one of those like all-time moments, right? I mean, and it was actually, it's been portrayed several times on film and very dramatically, as you might expect for a moment like this.
Captain gives the command, fire. There is silence.
All it took was one.
Then, cries of Vive l'Empereur ring through the regiment. They are won over. On my march to Grenoble, I was an adventurer, Napoleon later recalled. In Grenoble, I once again became a sovereign.
Not for long. Yeah, and see, this is a great point about what Napoleon made these people feel, right? There was an instantaneous and irresistible outburst. You would have thought the ceilings were coming down. I seemed to have become a Frenchman once more. This is what he inspired, and this is what Napoleon is counting on in this moment.
At the court of King Louis XVIII in Paris, there is disquiet, but no great sense of alarm.
Yet,
an outlaw adventurer and his small band of followers are surely no threat to the French state. The men who now draw up a plan to stop this escapade know the fugitive well. Marshal Soult, now Minister of War, joined by Marshals Oudinot, MacDonald, and Ney. Men who had won titles, riches, and glory under Napoleon, but continue to hold senior roles under the Bourbons. Ney, in particular, whom Napoleon had once dubbed bravest of the brave, seems to have switched his loyalty with zeal.
See, this is the trouble that you have if you're Louis XVIII. You come into this situation where Napoleon has dominated not only the politics but the military situation for so long in France that in order to purge all of that of anyone who might have loyalty to Napoleon, you're basically starting from scratch, and you just aren't able to do that.
I will seize Bonaparte, he tells the king, and I will bring him to you in an iron cage.
Yeah. Sure you will. Or you'll end up serving under him
Ney
again.
marches south with 3,000 troops to arrest his former master. But everywhere there are signs that Bourbon authority is collapsing.
So it's just fascinating to think about how the situation for Ney changed between Paris and his encounter with Napoleon.
Napoleon is welcomed with celebrations. Whole regiments are defecting to him. Ney hears grumbling within his own ranks. He's haunted by the prospect of civil war.
This is why you got to be careful what you say in a moment of passion, right? I'll bring him back in an iron cage, and then he goes out, and very quickly the political situation, the winds shift completely around him.
Napoleon writes directly to Ney. I shall receive you as I did on the morrow of the Battle of the Moskowa, he tells him. Ney is won over. The cause of the Bourbons is lost forever, he tells his troops. Only the Emperor Napoleon is entitled to rule over our beautiful country.
And with that, Marshal Ney will sign his own death warrant.
There are cheers amongst his men as he orders them to turn around and march on Paris. Ney's defection is the final straw for King Louis. On the 20th of March, he flees the Tuileries Palace, heading for safety in the Netherlands. That evening, Napoleon enters Paris. At the Tuileries, he is acclaimed by former ministers, dignitaries, and soldiers, many of whom are now out of work. Marshal Davout is there to welcome him. He had been ostracized by the Bourbons for his loyalty to Napoleon. Even Joseph Fouché, the wily Minister of Police for the last 16 years, is on hand to offer his services, which are quickly accepted.
Yeah, I mean, Napoleon needs that internal security. He needs that infrastructure to stay in place. He needs as much stability as possible as he builds an army and goes to war against the coalition again.
In these first weeks in Paris, Napoleon is a whirlwind of activity. He appoints new ministers, prefects, and mayors. He promises a new liberal constitution on the British model that will limit his powers.
So members cannot be arrested during legislative sessions, right to worship, property and trial, right to petition the government, Bourbon restoration is forbidden. Yeah, I mean, Napoleon understands this stuff. It's one of the underrated parts of Napoleon's personality is that he's so good, or at least very understanding of the importance of keeping the people happy giving them just enough to keep them from turning against you, but also giving them every reason to want to support you.
He lifts censorship and restarts public works. Whether such measures are long-term commitments or mere populism to win support will never be tested.
I don't know. Yeah, we'll never know, obviously, because his reign is only 3 months, but there's no reason to think they wouldn't have been, just because this all is pretty consistent with who he has been.
Bonaparte loyalists across France burst into activity, but many others are more cautious, preferring to wait out events. Because across Europe, there is the confident expectation that Napoleon's return can only mean war. The previous year, 1814, had seen Napoleon defeated by a giant coalition of his enemies after a decade of war. After their victory and Napoleon's exile to Elba, these powers met in one of history's first great international summits.
And fantastic series that was done by Historia Civilis on the Congress of Vienna. If you want to check that out, I'll put that link down in the description as well, and I'll put it up on the end screen so you can check that out. It's a great series.
The Congress of Vienna, to decide Europe's future. But without the threat of Napoleon to bind the coalition together, old rivalries and suspicions soon re-emerge. There are bitter disputes about territory and sovereignty.
Yeah, when you all have an enemy to focus on, it's easy to be united. The second that enemy is at least temporarily out of the picture, now you turn on each other.
A break between them, even war, seems a distinct possibility.
I wonder if Napoleon had waited a little longer, if a better opportunity might have presented itself if these factions had gone to war against each other.
But when the Allied monarchs hear that Napoleon has landed in France, they do not hesitate. They put aside their differences to form a seventh coalition and declare war, not on France, but on Napoleon.
Napoleon himself, yeah.
An enemy and disturber of the world. They plan to raise 4 massive armies. The Austrian Prince Schwarzenberg's army of the Upper Rhine. The Prussian Prince Blücher's army of the Lower Rhine. The British Duke of Wellington's multinational army of Flanders. And Barclay de Tolly's Russian Reserve Army. They will be supported by smaller contingents from Sweden, Denmark, Italy, Spain, and Portugal. Their total strength, on paper, nearly 1 million men. Napoleon has just 200,000 troops. Thousands of veterans have flocked to the colors. But
now, this is not unusual for Napoleon, right? I mean, he's faced 6 coalitions before this. He's many times before been overwhelmed by numbers in theater, but he's always found a way in his brilliance of maneuver and tactics and strategy, just been able to outwit and defeat them in detail, and he thinks he's going to be able to do that again.
The nation is exhausted. The return of conscription is dreaded, and Napoleon's war chest is a fraction of what is required. Parts of France are already in revolt. Royalist insurrections in the Midi and the Vendée force Napoleon to dispatch troops he cannot easily spare. Napoleon himself is still capable of prodigious bursts of energy and works 15 hours or more in a day. But years of exertion have taken their toll. Count Molion, his finance minister, observes, he found himself confined in a narrow space. His meditations became labored and distressing. He withstood less well the strains that were within him. After several hours...
When you're 45, you don't do things as easily as you did when you were 30. It's just the reality. No matter what good shape you're in, things are a little tougher. The body recovers a little slower. Sleep doesn't come as easily. Your vision's not as good as it was. There's a lot of just little things that you notice.
Of work, a certain lassitude came over him that he had never known before. Napoleon knows he has one chance. It will take his enemies months to assemble and organize their armies. If he strikes first and wins a sudden victory, he will throw their plans into chaos and may even split the coalition. He begins planning a lightning offensive against the targets within closest reach, the coalition armies of Blücher and Wellington, just across the frontier in Belgium.
Now, consider this entire strategic situation, right? We make a lot of the Battle of Waterloo about this incredibly decisive moment in which everything was on the line and Napoleon was defeated. But that means we have to assume a lot of things. We have to assume that Napoleon winning a victory at Waterloo means the coalition will fall apart, means it will turn on each other. That it means that these other hundreds of thousands of men who are kind of mobilizing and getting ready to converge on France wouldn't have been able to defeat him ultimately. And I just don't think that's based in reality. So as much as people make of Wellington's victory at Waterloo, I don't think it's the big, decisive moment that people want to make it out to be.
Part of the new United Kingdom of the Netherlands. The stage is set for war, but the first shots have already been fired.
Murat. It was all my own fault. I ought to have let him stay a marshal and never made him a Grand Duke of Berg, still less King of Naples. He was off his head. He wanted at a bound to be chief of everything. Napoleon expresses this kind of regret about a number of his marshals in hindsight after events unfold, and some of them turn against him. Bernadotte in Sweden's another example.
While Napoleon was still marching on Paris, on the 15th of March 1815, Joachim Murat, King of Naples, former Marshal of Napoleon's empire, and his brother-in-law, had declared war on the Seventh Coalition. Murat had loyally served Napoleon as a brilliant cavalry commander, from Italy and Egypt to Russia. But in 1814, he betrayed Napoleon, defecting to join his enemies. He only later realized that the coalition had no intention of letting him keep the throne Napoleon had given him.
Yeah, sometimes it just doesn't pay to look out for yourself, and he learned that the hard way, learned that in a very deadly way.
Murat's Neapolitan forces sweep through the Papal States and enter Bologna. But when the Austrians finally muster their forces, the tide quickly turns. Murat suffers a string of defeats, and in May 1815, as Austrian troops enter Naples, he flees to France.
Here's the thing about some generals, right? Some of these generals, they're fantastic, like corps commanders or division commanders. Especially aggressive commanders, they tend to do really well as long as there is an army commander or a theater commander over them that can keep them reined in to a degree. A great example I think of is George S. Patton in World War II. George S. Patton had a very specific role that he filled and filled brilliantly. I wouldn't have given him Eisenhower's job. That's just not who he was. He was not someone who I think would have done well in such a role. He needed kind of the constraints of stability over him.
On arriving in Toulon, Murat appeals to Napoleon, offering to fight at his side once more. Napoleon is not interested.
Nope.
It was doubtful whether the troops could surmount the disgust and horror which they felt for the man who had betrayed and lost France.
Right.
He would later say. In Belgium, meanwhile, the aggressive 72-year-old Field Marshal Blücher wants to strike into France immediately. But a mutiny among his 10,000 Saxon troops throws everything off. He must divert 14,000 reliable Prussians to watch them.
Yeah, this is just the nature of the now defunct Holy Roman Empire, right? You don't have a united Germany yet. You've still got all these factions, the Saxons and Württemberg and Bavaria and Prussia, they're just not a united group.
A force that will be sorely missed in the weeks ahead. The 46-year-old Duke of Wellington is also in a tricky situation. He had achieved stunning success, leading a joint Anglo-Spanish-Portuguese army against the French in the Peninsular War. But his old army of veterans has been widely dispersed. Now he commands a mixed force of British, Dutch, Hanoverian, Brunswick, Nassau and Belgian units. A few are reliable, but most are untested. Some are even suspected of loyalty to France. These troops are now spread thinly, watching the many possible routes into Belgium. But the coalition does have one strength on this front. Since their first correspondence, Wellington and Blücher have developed a sense of mutual respect and understanding.
That's huge.
Each feels that the other can be counted on.
That's so important when you're dealing with a coalition from different countries and speaking different languages and having different goals, to be able to unite like that, and it can make all the difference.
It will prove crucial in the coming campaign. By early June, reinforcements have brought their combined strength to 230,000, and a joint invasion is being discussed. Neither expects that they are about to be attacked. Along the Belgian frontier, the French have imposed strict secrecy. Civilians are not permitted to cross the border. French troop movements are hidden. Misinformation is spread. On the 12th of June, Napoleon makes a conspicuous public appearance in Paris. Then, quietly...
It's fascinating to me that with how quickly this all had to be pulled together. You know, he's only got 3 months from the time he leaves Elba to the time he's defeated at Waterloo, that he institutes all kinds of government changes, that he's putting down rebellions, that he's dealing with espionage and keeping things secret, and comes up with this plan to make them think he's still in Paris. It's pretty remarkable.
Slips away and races off to join the army. The French Armée du Nord is 128,000 strong, divided into 5 corps, a cavalry reserve, and the Imperial Guard. Though it includes many veterans of Napoleon's campaigns, it's a far cry from the Grande Armée of 1805. Supplies are scarce, hard cash even more so.
And the one thing you can never account for, well, a couple of things you can never account for. One is, what's the enemy going to do, right? No plan survives contact with the enemy, but also the weather. And how many times has the weather changed history?
The cavalry and artillery arms have recovered somewhat from the desperate days of 1814, but officers have been assigned to unfamiliar units, and discipline is lacking, even within the ranks of the Imperial Guard. Above all, Napoleon faces a crisis in leadership. Of the 26 marshals he'd created under the Empire, 3 have been killed in action. 4 have switched allegiance or disavowed Napoleon. 4 stand by new oaths of loyalty to the Bourbons. 10 are either too old for field command or prefer to remain politically neutral. This leaves Davout, Grouchy, Ney, Soult, and Suchet. All excellent, battle-tested commanders, but too few for the struggle ahead. Noticeably absent is the man often described as the indispensable marshal, Berthier.
Yep.
As Napoleon's chief of staff for 2 decades, Berthier had...
Do not underestimate the importance of a good chief of staff, right? Somebody who can think the way you do, who can help manage this massive movement and all the things that are happening, and almost, it really is like your right-hand man in all of this.
Performed the vital role of overseeing the emperor's headquarters and turning his words and thoughts into orders.
Yep.
But in March 1815, he fled to the Netherlands with King Louis. Napoleon is astonished and outraged. "I have been betrayed by Berthier, who was just a gosling transformed by me into some kind of eagle." Then, on the eve of war, Berthier falls from a high window. An accident seems most likely, but foul play cannot be ruled out.
Right, and the timing obviously is what's going to lead people to think, this seems a little more than just a bad accident.
As Berthier's replacement, Napoleon picks Marshal Soult, thus giving an administrative role to one of his best battlefield commanders.
Right, that's the problem.
Suchet, another brilliant general, is sent to the south to hold the frontier. While perhaps the best of all, Marshal Davout will remain in Paris as Napoleon's new Minister of War,
Doesn't leave
with the
him
added
much.
responsibility of defending the capital. These are important roles that Napoleon wants to entrust to loyal, experienced commanders. But his decisions will keep 3 of his best generals far from the action, with grave consequences. And there are soon signs that all is not well within the army. On arriving at headquarters, Napoleon discovers Marshal Soult has bungled his orders. Still settling into his...
When you are used to the same chief of staff for 20 years and you replace that guy, it's going to take a long time to adjust, and they just don't have that. Just the nuances of the instructions that you give. A lot of people make a big deal, a great example from the American Civil War that people like to point to, and I think it gets overblown, but there's the very famous incident where, on the first day of the Battle of Gettysburg, where Robert E. Lee sends instructions to Richard Ewell, who is a brand new corps commander. Lee has lost Stonewall Jackson at the Battle of Chancellorsville, and he's gone from 2 corps under Longstreet and Jackson to now 3 corps under Longstreet, Ewell, and A.P. Hill. And he sends an order to Ewell to take the hill south of town if practicable. And everyone says, well, that's just how Lee spoke to guys like Jackson, and he knew that Jackson knew what to do with an order like that, and he would be aggressive if there was any reason he could be. It's just a thing where there wasn't time to develop that relationship and that way of communicating that allowed you to understand one another. And that's what's happening here. You got a brand new chief of staff. You need months, if not years, to develop that.
New post, Soult has mistakenly concentrated the whole army west of where Napoleon had intended, while Marshal Grouchy's cavalry corps is far behind schedule. General Gérard's 4th Corps is also inexplicably delayed. Then, one of its division commanders defects to the enemy.
What a nightmare.
Throughout his life, Napoleon has believed in destiny, omens, and lucky dates. Few are more special to him than the 14th of June, the anniversary of his victories at Marengo and Friedland. He has chosen that providential date to launch this, the most high-stakes campaign of all. But in an operation that depends above all on speed, perhaps the real omen comes when he is forced to delay the start by 24 hours. At 2 a.m. on the 15th of June 1815, French drums beat the call to arms. As dawn approaches, the first battalions cross the frontier at Charleroi. Prussian sentries race away to inform Wellington and Blücher. Napoleon's final campaign has begun.
All right, great stuff, which leads right into the Battle of Waterloo, which is something that has already been covered by Epic History and by us looking at the video of Epic History. The entire Napoleonic War playlist will be pinned down in the comment section below, so you can check that out and see all of the videos we've looked at. It's an incredible story, amazing series. A couple of things real quick. Stick around for this. Just want to let you know a couple things. Number one, we still have 3 spots available for our August Scotland tour. Would love to have you join us on that. The link is in the description of every video. You can see the itinerary, download a brochure, and then you can book that if you want to reserve a spot. Also, we now have our Western Front tour that is available. That's going to be at the end of October. That's going to be amazing. I cannot wait to do that. We've got still about 25-30 spots available for that one. And then I just want to give a shout out and a thank you to Joseph Massinelli and Cole Laurie for your support on Patreon. Thank you so much. We'll see you again next time. Thanks for watching.